It started like any ordinary day, but everything changed when a routine police checkpoint turned into a shocking scene of overreach. The officers stopped a car driven by an elegant woman, unaware of her true identity. Mrs. Catherine, the police commissioner's wife. As she politely complied with their questions, the situation quickly escalated. The officers insisted on searching her vehicle, ignoring her objections and seemingly crossing all boundaries. Catherine kept her composure, but you could see the disbelief and frustration in her eyes. The tension in the air was undeniable. Little did the officers know, a simple phone call was about to change everything. Moments later, her husband, the commissioner himself, arrived at the scene. What followed left everyone speechless. Were the officers held accountable for their actions? Or did the situation take an unexpected twist? Stay tuned to see how this unbelievable encounter unfolded. As the commissioner stepped out of his car, his presence was commanding, and the officers immediately realized something was off. The look on his face wasn't one of anger. It was something much colder, calculated, and calm. He approached the officers slowly, scanning the scene, his wife standing silently nearby. You could tell she was holding back a flood of emotions, but she remained composed, clearly trusting her husband to handle things. The officers, now visibly nervous, scrambled to justify their actions. They stammered about following protocol and claimed they were unaware of Mrs. Catherine's identity. But the commissioner didn't interrupt. He let them speak, watching their every move with an unsettling stillness. Behind him, curious bystanders began to gather, whispering amongst themselves. Why had the officers acted so aggressively in the first place? Was it truly just a misunderstanding, or was there something more behind their actions? The air was thick with questions, but no answers yet. As the commissioner quietly observed the situation, one of the officers hesitated before stepping forward. He began explaining that the search was part of a larger operation, vaguely mentioning reports of a suspicious vehicle matching Mrs. Catherine's car. But something about his tone didn't sit right. It was defensive, almost rehearsed, as if he was trying to hide something. The commissioner's wife, still standing off to the side, finally spoke up. Her voice was steady but firm as she asked, "Is this really about protocol, or is there more to it?" Her question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, no one responded. Then, a younger officer, who had been silent until now, nervously glanced at his colleagues before looking away, guilt written all over his face. Was there an internal issue they were trying to cover up? Or had this incident simply spiraled out of control? Meanwhile, the small crowd of onlookers grew restless, whispering theories about what had led to this moment. Some speculated it was a case of mistaken identity. Others wondered if Mrs. Catherine had been specifically targeted. The commissioner, still composed, finally broke his silence with a chilling question. "Did you follow proper procedure before making this decision?" The senior officer stammered, but before he could answer, a faint look of recognition passed between him and the younger officer. It was subtle but enough to hint that there might be something deeper at play. Whatever the truth was, it hadn't surfaced yet, and it felt like the calm before the storm. The air seemed to crackle with tension as the commissioner's piercing gaze locked on the senior officer. His questions still lingered, unanswered, and the silence stretched uncomfortably long. The younger officer shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between his colleagues as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't bring himself to. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their curiosity feeding off the unease in the air. Finally, the senior officer cleared his throat and began speaking, his words slow and deliberate. "We were following a lead, something we couldn't ignore." But before he could finish, the commissioner raised a hand to stop him. "A lead?" he asked, his voice sharp. "On what grounds did you escalate to a search without cause?" The younger officer took a small step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't her car, sir. It was a mistake." His words seemed to catch everyone off guard, including the senior officer, who shot him a furious look. Mrs. Catherine's expression shifted slightly, her calm exterior now laced with disbelief. A mistake. That explanation didn't match the intensity of the scene. Just as the commissioner was about to press further, a car parked nearby suddenly sped off, catching everyone's attention. The officers froze, their radios crackling to life with urgent chatter. The commissioner turned back to the senior officer, his voice icy. "What are you telling me?" The atmosphere was electric with unanswered questions, and it felt like everything was building toward an explosive revelation. Whatever secrets were buried here, they weren't staying hidden much longer. As the speeding car disappeared into the distance, the commissioner's sharp instincts kicked in. He gestured to his wife to step back while addressing the officers. "Who was in that car?" he demanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. The senior officer looked rattled, fumbling for words before finally muttering, "It's unrelated, sir. Just someone fleeing the scene." But the commissioner wasn't buying it. The younger officer, clearly torn, suddenly blurted out, They were here earlier, asking questions about her car." His words landed like a bombshell. Mrs. Catherine's eyes widened as the realization set in. This wasn't just a random checkpoint. She was being watched. The crowd, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, fell silent, hanging on every word. "Who were they?" The commissioner pressed, his voice growing colder. But before the younger officer could respond, the senior officer cut in sharply, ordering him to stay quiet. The tension between them was palpable now, the cracks in their story widening with every passing second. And then it happened. A call came through the commissioner's radio, a voice on the other end urgently reporting a connection between the fleeing car and an ongoing investigation into corruption within the police department. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but they painted a far more dangerous picture than anyone had anticipated. The commissioner's expression darkened as he realized this wasn't just about his wife. It was about something much bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface. All eyes were now on him, waiting to see what he would uncover next. The stakes had never been higher, and the truth, whatever it was, felt closer than ever. The commissioner's sharp mind raced as the puzzle began to come together. Turning back to the officers, he spoke with icy precision. "You have one chance to come clean. Who were those people, and why is my wife suddenly part of this?" His words left no room for evasion. The senior officer opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the younger officer broke the silence. "They're connected to the internal investigation," he confessed, his voice trembling. "We were told to watch her car, but we didn't know it was her asterisk. They said someone close to you might be a target." The crowd gasped, and even Mrs. Catherine looked stunned. The commissioner's jaw tightened. Targeted by whom? Before anyone could answer, another voice broke in, a commanding, unfamiliar tone coming from behind the crowd. "By someone you trusted," the man said, stepping forward. It was a detective from the commissioner's own department, his expression smug. "We needed leverage to flush out the mole, and your wife was the perfect bait." The crowd erupted in murmurs as the commissioner's face hardened. "You jeopardized her safety without informing me," he demanded, his voice like thunder. The detective smirked. "It worked, didn't it? That car wasn't fleeing. It's being tracked now. You'll have your answers soon." But then in a twist no one saw coming, the commissioner's wife finally spoke up, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. "You didn't need to flush out a mole," she said, her gaze locked on the detective. "You already knew who it was, because it's you." The detective froze, his smirk fading as the realization sank in. The commissioner's team, now fully alert, closed in, securing the area. The detective stammered, trying to deny it, but it was too late. The evidence from the fleeing car had already been intercepted, implicating him. The commissioner turned to his wife, pride and relief in his eyes. "How did you know?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "You're not the only one who knows how to connect the dots." As the officers secured the rogue detective, the commissioner took a deep breath, his composure finally softening. He turned to his wife, gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "You've always been a step ahead," he said quietly. Mrs. Catherine smiled, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I just knew something didn't add up," she replied. "When they stopped me, it wasn't random. They were stalling for something. I overheard enough to piece it together." The crowd, now dispersing, left behind a hum of chatter about the dramatic turn of events. The commissioner's team quickly acted on the intercepted evidence, unraveling a web of corruption that had run deeper than anyone had suspected. Justice, it seemed, would finally prevail. As the couple drove away together, the commissioner glanced at his wife, a rare smile breaking through his stern exterior. "Remind me never to underestimate you," he said. She laughed softly. "I'd hope you've learned that by now."